El siguiente capítulo fue grabado en inglés. Some winemakers make great wine. Others change the way the world thinks about wine. Forbes once called him the Steve Jobs of wine. He helped launch Opus One, one of Napa Valley's most iconic projects, and later played a pivotal role in elevating Malbec from Argentina to the world stage.
There is where I tasted some of the worst wines I've ever tasted in my life. So how do they do that to those nice grapes?
That moment, Brettanomyces was considered like part of the terroir.
It should be showcasing the vineyard, shouldn't it? And the fruit from the vineyard, not the contamination that you have in your cellar.
Paul is crazy. He knows how to do wines in Mendoza and in Argentina because it doesn't rain there. But in Uruguay it rains a lot and it's impossible to do Chardonnay like he says.
You're saying that you were part of like that change in the American wine, living that moment.
I was living in that moment, which was pretty extraordinary. But the first part was surviving the ride over the Andes with Jorge, because the guy is partially blind.
What you say sometimes, this smells fecal.
I don't know, can we say that in the podcast?
Yes, we can.
Today on FOGÓN, Paul Hobbs.
Bienvenidos a la segunda temporada de FOGÓN, un podcast original de bodega Familia Deicas. Soy Santiago Deicas y te invito a descubrir las historias que se esconden detrás de los vinos que compartimos. Servite una copa y vení, conmigo y con Tute, a disfrutar de FOGÓN.
So, Paul, if I'll ask you, how would you present yourself to someone who doesn't know you? How would you describe yourself?
Well, about 5'10".
It's a way to start,
Blue eyes. No, but if they can see me, then if they would ask me, well, what do I do, or what's important in my life, I would say, well, from a family is very important, and then in my career, I like to do things that challenge me. So, but basically, I'm probably a farmer first, but I always have an end view. So I would say I would present myself as a person that's a farmer that makes wine. How's that?
I like that presentation.
I would like you to tell us how was your beginnings. I've always been amazed on why and how could you manage to be in charge of Robert Mondavi's part in the Opus One project. I imagine yourself fighting against the French winemakers to kind of, fight for your style against their style. I don't know how much of that is my imagination and how much is true, but I would like to know the beginnings of that area.
Yeah. Mostly your imagination. Because, we were hoping, it's the concept of Opus One with Mouton Rothschild was it's a joint venture, right? So you bring two different parties to the table and you work together to make something new. And so basically that's not how it worked.
It was a good idea.
It was that's how we thought, but you know how many things go, right? So truly the French sort of dictated how we were going to make the wine. And Mr. Mondavi acquiesced and said, that's okay. Let them tell us how they want to make the wine, and we're going to follow their instructions. But the interesting part was our thought process, from the time I'd only been at Mondavi for about 18 months prior to being appointed to the Opus One team, is that, but I saw very quickly that the Mondavi approach to making wine, and I had no other experience outside of that, so I didn't have a knowledge of how other people work. But I had a sense that the Mondavis were challenging and questioning everything that was done. So, and trying to understand, well, why do you do that? And but when the French showed up, it was nothing like that at all. There was no more questioning. It was, this is how you do it. It was sort of pedantic in that sense. And so they had wine is a craft, and this is too complicated, too many questions. You Californians are asking too many questions, that kind of thing. So They had more like a recipe approach and they said, well, we've been doing this for many years, so we know that. So, okay, let's see how they want to do it. That was the basic interaction.
What was your age at that moment?
79, I would have been 26, I believe. Yeah.
And do you guess why Robert Mondavi trusted you to be in charge of such a big project?
Well, I wasn't in charge.
I was on the French
team. I was. Remember that.
You was in charge because the French were there. But
when they weren't there, then I was more or less in charge. So, but my job was, of course, Tim Mondavi, Mr. Mondavi. But Mr. Mondavi was more the figurehead, and Tim was also not involved in the day-to-day winemaking. So my job was to work with the cellar team and to make the wine. and so basically, we did things essentially the way that the French wanted to do, but I also did my own experimentation. And that was to verify if their approach was superior to approach that maybe I thought, or I said, well, okay, that's what they want to do, but I'm going to do a few my way just to see what happens. And that's something that was internal. I never discussed that with the French.
Oh, that's awesome. And after this, you went to consult Catena in Argentina, is that right?
No, not immediately. Let me think, when you were asking me how old I was, because I was 79, I had to think quick. I was actually 29, not 26. So, no, I went on to author a Cabernet program at Simi Winery in Healdsburg, California. So that's Sonoma County, more coastal. While I was there at Simi, we became part of the newly formed LVMH luxury group. Because of our ownership was based in New York, Shefflin and Somerset. They were the import arm of Moet Hennessy. Yes. So basically, what happened is that when we became part of LVMH, I was made one of the directors of the company, and I was still quite young and no experience in management. So I thought this is a great opportunity to get experience, but my boss was also not very experienced in management, running a company. So we're like the blind leading the blind. Nobody knows what the hell we should be doing. But, so that meant, okay, we're trying to figure out what executives do. Because I had no training. So only from watching people at Mondavi did I learn anything about how executives behave. So, but that put me doing that kind of work more than I wanted. I wanted to stay working in the kitchen, so to speak, making wine and working in the vineyard. And I think it's probably hard maybe for many listeners to understand that the concept of making wine in California was you made wine, but if you made wine, you were not involved in the vineyard. And I wanted to meld those two together, which is a very old world, the natural old world approach. And for me, that was natural growing up as a farmer. I wanted to spend half my day in the vineyard and half my day in the winery and no time in the boardroom. So that's what took me to South America. At that point, I was approaching my mid-30s, so I was maybe like 33, and thinking, how is my career going to go? I mean, I was at a crossroad thinking, am I going to continue working for others, or am I going to start my own winery and do my own thing? And I wanted to do that, but of course it's very expensive. So that's what led me to seek another avenue, to start thinking about maybe consulting and how to finance the startup of my own project. And things were changing rapidly technically in the business. I mean, when we think about the late 70s and 80s, mostly I think about that was the time of the winery. We were trying to figure out how do you work with barrels And we had a lot of technological issues that had not yet been solved. So that was a big focus. The winery, what kind of equipment, how should the equipment be designed, and how should it be designed to make wines? And then that changed once we began to get a better handle on that. Then basically, as we moved into the 90s and 2000s, it was more vineyard focused and less in the winery.
And also in terms of the quality perceived by the consumers, in the 70s, the only good wine was the French.
Yeah.
Nobody thought if you were to sell a wine in New York, Robert Mondavi couldn't sell the wines from Napa until mid-80s in a high quality standard, because consumers were not thinking about local wine in the US or wine outside France as a quality wine. So it's also a big change in the mind of the consumers.
That's really true. And there were a couple of, Opus One was maybe the second event that helped change the American mentality in particular, but also gave rise to the wine writer, the American wine writer,
Yes.
because before that, everything was controlled by the British. You had Hugh Johnson and of course,
Os Clark.
Oz Clark,
Jancis Aussie, but in
Oz
UK.
Clark, Jancis Robinson, and so on. They had full control of the wine press. There was no true. You had the beginning of the Wine Spectator happening about the time that I started, I think, and so American press. But really, I think the first was that tasting in Paris.
Yes.
In 1976, that began to transform the way Americans thought about American wine.
Yes.
And then, of course, Opus One was confirmation, in a sense, that the French valued the quality of wines from California, because here they were coming to invest in California and starting a joint venture with an American company.
Yeah.
So those were some of the key turning points that helped launch the American wine. Then you began seeing the growth of the American wine writer. And of course, the Wine Spectator grew dramatically, but probably the most influential person was a single individual, Robert Parker. We all know what he did, but he wasn't alone. I mean, again, you had Steve Tanser, who was brilliant. And so a lot of people that never thought about wine, from particularly the baby boom generation, which is my generation, all of a sudden, these people, they had disposable income, and Parker appealed to them, his style of wine appealed to them, so they became fanatics. And that became what really grew, not only Bordeaux, primarily Bordeaux and Napa Valley.
Yes.
But that was the spark, I think the final spark that kind of kicked the American wine business into high gear.
And coming back to your view of starting your own business in the late 80s, was this when you thought
Yes.
about going to Argentina to make some consultancy?
Well, actually, I didn't really know what I was doing.
It's crazy because you're saying that you were part of like that change in the American wine.
I was there. I didn't play a significant.
No, I know, but you were part of that.
But I was there experiencing it.
That's like living that moment.
I was living in that moment, which was pretty extraordinary.
And
Yeah.
then you came to South America. That was some steps behind, no?
Well, I came to South America with the eye, because mainly I was interested in all the news coming out of Chile, they were like the Chilean terroir was considered, if you think about the 80s, the late 80s, like the newest and most exciting region of the world for development. So I thought, okay, I'll go to Chile and see what they're doing. And why is everybody excited about Chile? But, I had a good visit there. That was organized by a classmate friend of mine at UC Davis, Marcelo Kogan, who was a professor at the Catholic University in Santiago. And he organized 2 visits per day. And we were very good friends. He was, as I mentioned, a professor. He earned his PhD when I was earning my master's at Davis. At any rate, I also invited another classmate friend, Jorge Catena. So it's this entire thing, that how I ended up in Argentina was Jorge was there to make sure that I went to Argentina. But I never had a plan to go there.
Oh.
And what happened is that my host, Marcelo, was upset with the fact that I had invited someone from Argentina to go to see the winery. So he told me, no, you cannot take any person from Argentina to see the wineries. And then I told Jorge, of course, I said, well, my host is not accepting that you're here. In fact, he was angry. And so I told Jorge, sorry, but you have to go back to Argentina. He said, no, I don't have to go back. I have things to do in Chile. And so every day he was coming, and I was staying at Marcelo's house, and he'd park his car in the front, and Marcelo was like, whoa, very heated. And finally Marcelo said, this guy, you can't get rid of him, so you both go. And that's how I came to Argentina.
And you crossed by car, no?
Yeah, unfortunately. I thought the way Jorge Catena drove was the way Argentines drove. I didn't realize he is a special person in an automobile.
Just to understand, Jorge is from Nicolas?
The younger brother.
The younger brother.
Of Nicolas, okay. Yeah. Jorge, for many years, had been asking me to go to Argentina to work with Nicolas and to help consult to them. Every year he would come to Mondavi, then to see me every year. And I told him, no. So, but finally, since I got thrown out of Chile, and they said, okay, I'll spend one day to see what's going on in Mendoza, because the reputation of Argentina at that particular time was extremely bad place for wine.
Remember the year? It was
88.
88. Okay.
Yeah.
So
March of 88, harvest. It was during the harvest of 88 that I entered Argentina.
With no expectations.
Oh, I had an expectation, but they were not good. So I think, I'm just going to waste a day, but okay, I'm going to see it. So, but the first part was surviving the ride over the Andes with Jorge, because the guy is partially blind. I didn't realize he had vision problems. And so he had difficulty navigating when to make the caracoles, and the switchbacks. He would have to hear the sound of the gravel. So yeah, you got to turn. So it was very scary going over the Andes with him. But that's where I encountered, coming into Mendoza, the old vines, high density plantings, and these alluvial soils that were really rocky, and thinking, wow, these vineyards look good, better than what I was seeing in Chile. After 4 days in Chile, the first vineyard I see in Argentina is superior.
So when you see these vines, it's like discovering that something good was really going on, but maybe not in the glass of the wine.
Correct.
It was not reaching the glass, but the grapes were well.
So the farming was not good.
But
The fruit wire was very low to the ground, but the planting was good, and the soils were good. And so it made me scratch my head and think, well, why does Argentina have such a bad reputation? Because outside, in the U.S. anyway, people that had traveled to Argentina came back and said, that's a place, don't go there. Because the quality is so bad, and it's too hot, and the soils are too sandy. So they can never make good wine there. And later I realized most of those people that had come had flown into Mendoza airport, did not cross the Andes. And maybe that was one of my advantages. By going by car, as we descended, I said, wow, these soils are really good. The temperature is not so hot because of the Andes, higher elevation. So then and that was when I encountered my very first Malbec as well. And I didn't know what Malbec was. I never heard of the variety or worked with it. So I was curious. I asked Jorge, what is this? And he said, it's Malbec, and so on. And so that's kind of my first encounter with that variety.
And Malbec was used for table wine.
Basically but nobody was making much wine under cork and bottles. Everything was bulk production, sold in 3 and 5 liter demijohn or demajuanas. or in Tetra Brick, 1 liter Tetra Brick, very low quality. So even the Catena family was only making maybe 1,000 cases of corked finish wine. And all those wines were oxidized, by the way. All of them. Everything they had. So when I got, after seeing the vineyard, then Jorge took me out to where the Catena winery was. It wasn't called Catena, it was called Esmeralda. Bodegas Esmeralda. There was no Catena label. So there is where I tasted some of the worst wines I've ever tasted in my life. Wow. So how do they do that to those nice grapes? So the wines were pretty rough. Yeah. So then, of course, either later that day or the next day, they flew me to meet Nicolas in Buenos Aires, and that's how we started our association.
And when did you feel that you wanted to do something there for yourself? Because it's easy to understand that helping others do something in a very unique place, but being from another country, having not so much experience there, to say, okay, I want to own something here.
Yeah, it's actually a fairly complex question, but I put a lot of my, you might say, I put 9 years developing the Catena program. And along the way, I did really what turned out to be the first work to produce a commercially successful Malbec. And that was called Alamos. And then I became the U.S. importer because nobody in the U.S. knew what Malbec was, nor did people think about Argentina as a wine-producing country. They thought of Chile in South America. So I had to do the groundwork, if you will, to introduce the variety and to talk about Mendoza and et cetera to the American press and to the trade, basically. So to the opinion makers. So that was so I invested a lot of my time. While I was also using that time, fortunately we were bi-hemispheric, so I could work in the opposite season in California, building the Paul Hobbs program as well and consulting. And so that was what I was doing. And I would say in some situation I was spending nearly 5, almost up to 6 months a year in Argentina in the beginning. So that's quite a commitment.
Yes.
And so when I got to a certain point with the Catena project, which was basically beginning in 1996, 97, I had built the first Catena Zapata wines, which were Malbec Cabernet blends. And those were turning out really nicely. But I could see that otherwise I wanted to do my own thing. And Nicholas, I think, was thinking, okay, Paul, you've had your ride with me. You've got me where I want to go. So it's time to make a separation. So we both naturally kind of came to the conclusion that I should separate. But having invested so much of my energy in a core part of my life, I mean, basically from the time I was 35 to almost, I guess, 45, when I think about it, I was working on that project. So I was, okay. And I wanted to explore Malbec as a noble variety. And so that was my main impetus for starting Viña Cobos, was to do more exploration on Malbec.
Awesome.
So you stayed in Argentina because you saw the vineyards of Malbec and you believed in those vineyards and on that soil.
Yeah, and also, I mean, there was a lot of factors. I had made a strong connections when you spend that much time. I liked Argentina. The political situation was always interesting, but I liked what I saw was an opportunity. You know, I was sort of one of the pioneers to help develop Argentina, right, and help give it its signature variety. I was heavily invested. Also, I felt that would be a mistake to leave after all that work, having just done something for someone else and building their program and helping them. So I wanted to see what I could do. That, I think it was, I don't know what the right word is, but I mean, I have to be thoughtful about that. But basically, I felt a strong urge to work and develop Malbec as a noble variety, or to see if it really was a noble variety. That's something we didn't have proof. And so that was the reason
That's amazing.
Yeah. The tricky part, of course, was how do I do that and run my own winery? And how do you set up a winery in a foreign country as complicated as Argentina? So, but the one thing that was clear to me, you know how life is interesting, something that happened was Opus One, the joint ventures. Okay, that model worked for Mr. Mondavi and Mouton Rothschild. Why wouldn't it work for me in Argentina? You know, I use the same approach. So work with local people. That was very clear to me that was going to be necessary. And that's why I started searching for my partners.
And you found Andrea Marchiori.
Yes.
And Luis Blanchard.
Luis Barraud.
Luis Barraud.
Yeah. And the way my wife was Argentinian from the small town of San Rafael. And one day I told Mariela, or I asked her, well, next time you go, or I need to find some partners here, so can you help me? And she said, well, okay. Then she was on a bus ride from Mendoza to San Rafael, and she got up I wasn't with her, she got up in front of the bus. This is what she told me. I got up in front of the bus and I said, hey, everybody, I need your attention. My husband is looking to start his own project, his own winery. Is anybody interested? That's how it started.
My God.
Yeah. And someone on the bus knew Luis, I believe, and said, okay, Luis and Andrea had just been married. This is April of 1997 when they were married. And so shortly after that, Mariela had the contact with them. And that's how I met Luis and Andrea. They came to California. They worked with me on Paul Hobbs Wines. And over a roasted chicken dinner celebrating Luis's birthday, we set up the company.
And getting from there, when was the first time you came to Uruguay and why?
So the first time was in 1993. And I was invited by the Bodegueros, Centro de Bodegueros, as part of a project that was funded by the Inter-American Development Bank out of Washington, D.C. And they were funding 3 countries, 3 programs. In Uruguay, I know that wine was one of the programs. And so it was a 3-year commitment. And that's how I came first, was to work on learning about, I handled the winemaking side of it, but also some vineyard. So I was production. And then there was another guy, actually a guy from ex-Mondavi. And so I knew him, Brian Loomis. And he was the commercial. And so that was the exercise that we were doing, was to help grow the wine business here.
And you knew my father in that
At that
trip.
moment.
Yes.
Yeah, at that moment I met your father.
You met him.
Yeah, Fernando, I met him, and then of course, I think at the time it was Javier Corral was the president of the Centro, and I met Stagnare and many people. It was fantastic, actually.
Santi, and I feel weird asking you in English, but so if you are speaking English. What was the first time you called Paul to work with alongside Familia Deicas?
In 2011, with my father, we were struggling to make a Tanat that can be successful outside Uruguay, maybe outside Uruguay and San Pablo. And we saw what happened with Malbec worldwide. This Malbec from Argentina that was unknown. And since the beginning of 2000, late in the 90s, it grew to such a level worldwide, especially starting in the US, but then spread all around the world in an amazing way. So we thought, and we knew that at the beginning, Malbec was not a high-end, a noble variety, or not considered as such. And many or a few winemakers were responsible of this change. So we said, okay, let's work with someone that can help us do a similar process with Tanat. And we made a list of 5 winemakers, and Paul was the first one in the list. I personally thought it won't be possible, and my father remembered that he met Paul in like 20 years before that. So he found a friend that had Paul's contact and knew him, and they organized a meeting. My father tells me that in that meeting, they sat like for 10 or 15 minutes, and Paul remembered everything about the visit that he had done. And he said something like, I was interested in making something in Uruguay, and I think it must be with you. Something like that. Do you remember that meeting?
Yes, very much. Yeah. Well, because your father was very progressive, and so that was almost a no-brainer when he asked me that. Yeah.
I hope
if there was going to be a person to work with, I just felt that he would be the right person.
Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah.
What did you see on your visit 20 years before that you said, I'm going to do something with him?
Well, I think, one of the things that's super important is a curiosity. And Fernando, he has a tremendous curiosity. And so, but also drive. I mean, energy and drive and to make things happen. And so I just felt he had all the right ingredients. And so that if we're going to do something, he's the right guy to do it with.
Santi, how is it working with Paul?
Well, that was amazing. Just to we were honored to be working with him because we knew that many wineries were trying to have Paul's consultants, and it was not possible. And we were already happy with that. Then we had to work, and we started in 2012. We started working, preparing the harvest of 2013. And I remember the first tasting that we did. We were tasting a lot of wines, but I remember the whites at that moment. I remember that Paul tasted the Preludio white, the Chardonnay, and he said, it is a nice wine, but it is too phenolic. Too phenolic. And I didn't understand why a white should be phenolic. Phenolic is usually something that I think about with reds, but he was seeing something else, And his tasting was amazing. And then he said to me and to my father and to Adriana, he said, I think we could make Chardonnays with native yeasts and without adding sulfur. And we said with Adriana, Paul is crazy. He knows how to do wines in Mendoza and in Argentina because it doesn't rain there. But in Uruguay, it rains a lot, and it's impossible to do Chardonnay like he says. Then when the harvest was approaching, he told us how he wanted to do the Chardonnay. It's always a suggestion, and he says, well, I do this in other countries like this. I guess we should, and we could try like this. My father said, okay, this would be done with barrels, but it's prohibited to use new barrels because this is going to be spoiled and the barrels were going to be destroyed. So new barrels could be too expensive to make an experimentation.
Yeah.
So the first harvest we did second use barrels with Paul's idea, and new and second use with our traditional idea approach. And the no yeast or wild yeast approach with no sulfur was amazing. It was more challenging because it was slower, and in the process it was not showing so bright as the other ones, but at the end it was much, much better. So the next harvest we were more willing or happy to do more barrels like this. We did half and half, and we also tried with new barrels. And then after the 14th harvest, the 15th and until today, we do 100% of our Preludio White, our single vineyard Chardonnay, our Cru Chardonnay, our Cru Albarino, all our barrel fermented, fooder fermented, and also part of our tank fermented whites are done with this crazy idea of adding anything to the wine and letting the place speak by itself.
Yeah, that's a compliment to the Deicases for embracing that approach, because it is true that the weather here tends to be more humid and more rainfall. So sometimes you're going to have some challenges with the fruit. But by the same token, of course, this technique, I can't take credit for it. Most of that credit goes to the monks of Burgundy. But I think through their work, they demonstrated that, well, it rains in Burgundy during the harvest as well. Yes. I mean, it rains everywhere eventually. But I mean, how do you make naturally fermented wines? So that was the challenge. And actually, it was one of the reasons it was so interesting to take on this project, working with the Deicases on this sort of thing, because there is more climate here, if you will, or more weather during the harvest or the lead up to harvest. And also, I mean, we can't forget that to make those kind of wines has different challenges than wines that you make with cultured yeast and more things that you add to the wine to protect it. So we had to really focus on some basic winemaking changes, if you will. Yes. And one of them, of course, was, sanitation was already good, but we had to even take it another level higher. So one day I remember that Fernando, Santi, Adriana, everybody in the winery got scrub brushes and we cleaned. We spent the whole afternoon cleaning. Yeah. It was really a good process, though, and I think it actually helped bring the team together even in a stronger way.
I remember that day, as it was today, we were waiting for making the first official Tanat with Paul. We knew his obsession with hygiene, so everything was clean to our eyes, no? And we were really proud. All the team was proud of how clean was everything. We're waiting for Paul. Paul came. He went to the tank. Inside the tank, he asked for a staircase.
A ladder.
A ladder. He climbed to the tank. He went to a corner of the tank. He did like this with his finger, and he had dust. So he said to our winemaker at the moment, he said, "Okay, do you think this is clean?" and that was when everybody was cleaning the tank, and we waited like 5 more hours to begin the process of the first Tanat with Paul. And I remember that Paul said something very mind-changing at the moment. We were used to French, especially Bordeaux winemaking style, which is not so focused, or this was not so focused on hygiene. It was focused on doing the right techniques, adding the right yeast enzymes, doing wine not so hygienically, but arriving to a really good point. And Paul said, "Okay, you can be either a very healthy person and make exercise, had a good diet, and have a healthy life. Or you can be not so healthy in your way of life, but use a lot of medicine. And also the result might be similar, because the result, if you see the people, maybe you don't realize how they arrived to that approach." And he said, "I look for the hygiene, the fit, the diet and the exercise people with no medicines." And I loved that concept. And we started to go to that approach. It was not easy at the beginning. It's still not easy, because when I say we don't add anything to the wine, it seems to be easier, because you be relaxed, you do like this, and you let the wine.
Sounds that way.
It sounds like you let the wine
do it
by itself. But it needs much more work, much more hygiene, much more analysis, much more control in terms of anticipating what is going on, and also much more precise tasting and skills.
Yeah, that's, I think, well said. This idea is all, or the philosophy is all tied to the idea of showcasing the terroir, or sense of place. And so, that was one of the things that I had struggled with when I was working in California and talking to this concept of terroir, which grew out of France. And then going there, and their cellars were dirty or their wines were contaminated. And then they would say, that's the goût de terroir of our place. But I said, well, but it should be showcasing the vineyard, shouldn't it? And the fruit from the vineyard, not the contamination that you have in your cellar. And so they didn't like that question very much.
And that moment, Brettanomyces was considered like part of the terroir. Remember?
Truly, absolutely. Yeah, and only, I think there was only one person out of Bordeaux that really led the charge to change Bordeaux winemaking, because back in the 80s and 90s, and that was Jean-Michel Casse, and he had come to California and he realized that we were in a fight against Brettanomyces. And it's a spoilage yeast that smells, when it grows in wine, it smells like a sweaty horse. But people were accustomed to that.
Or what you say sometimes, this smells fecal.
Well, that's the worst.
That's the worst.
I don't know. Can we say that in a podcast?
Yes, we
can. Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, but that's actually fecal is more bacterial than the Brettanomyces. But anyway, they had both.
Spoilage, yes.
They had both types of infections. So I'm sort of a purist in this sense. Wanted to really say, no, it should taste like it's from the vineyard, not like something that you did to it or you didn't intend to do to it because of your lack of hygiene. So that's why, cleaning to make wines that are nurtured and made in the most natural way actually do have a higher requirement. You might say like a surgical requirement. And that way you get the true wild yeast from the vineyard conducting the fermentation and helping those yeast really showcase the terroir.
It has a lot to do with craft beer brewing, which in a craft beer, if you have a slightly spoilage in yeast or bacteria, it's very evident that the beer is crap.
Yeah.
In wine, you can have... we think that we can have some relaxation if there's something wrong going on there, but at the end, the wine is not going to be in the level that we want to be.
Yeah. And it went through a period of time where that change was controversial. It was like, well, we're used to this character, but even the Bordelais have changed as well. And that's...
Yes.
I mean, they've cleaned up their wineries.
Of course.
And again, I think the Frenchman that went back to Bordeaux and convinced his compadres that, hey, you guys really do have a problem. We really have a problem here. And so it was Jean-Michel Casse at Chateau Lynchbage that really, I think, helped change the face of Bordeaux.
And besides hygiene, that's really evident. That was a challenge. What were the other challenges that you faced when we started working with Familia Deicas?
Well, I think, the big challenge for me, of course, is getting to know the place. But they wanted to study the different terroirs of Uruguay, which, this is cool. That's exactly what I would like to do. So they wanted to explore other regions because, we're in Canelones and this area, Progreso, the soils here are of a particular type. And so I said, okay, let's go. So we jumped in Fernando's car and we'd spend, a couple of days driving around and hunting for places. And that was really exciting. And then I'd come back and he bought the place. So, okay, great. We're going to plant it. What do we plant here? Okay, let's go. So I think that's the kind of exploration that's really serves the consumer really well, because the quality, of course, and the diversity that you get from even one variety, like if you just take Tannat, for example, and it can show so many different faces, quite exciting. So that's been exciting. So, of course, today, Tannat is the thumbprint, if you will, of Uruguay. That's when anywhere in the world, everybody asks, well, what wines are from Uruguay? They say Tannat is the lead variety. It's the signature variety. Just as Malbec is for Argentina today. So, and that doesn't happen unless you have diversity and you can show that kind of nobility. And that's, I think, what the Deicas have done. They've been a leader in that.
And Santi, in your side, how does Paul help the team and you in the bodega, like to make better wines?
First of all, everybody in the team is very excited when Paul is going to arrive. And we know that the focus that he gives to the hygiene, so the winery is really clean, and it keeps clean during all the year, because we know that Paul might arrive any day. And also we used to work 4 times a year. Now we are working maybe 2 or 3, and every time it's also a moment where we taste wines that are already made. And it's also a way of seeing, okay, how are we doing? So it's like a test that we have. And then it's a lot of learning, because when you see Paul tasting, he has this superpower of tasting like nobody else in the world, at least nobody that I know. I've spoken with people that know him very well, and everybody agrees with that. I made sometimes I give him the same sample in different moments, and he tastes, and he doesn't care what it says in the sheet, in the tasting sheet. He tastes and he says what he feels, and it's very accurate every single time. And sometimes he says something about that wine, and we taste it 9 months after that, the same barrel, and I go back to my points, my notes. And he said exactly the same thing. And it's very, very accurate and very precise. And we learn a lot. I know how red currant tastes by tasting wine with Paul. I never tasted a red currant, but I know how it tasted in wine, because he says red currant, and sometimes I find myself writing red currant. And we don't have red currant in Uruguay. And I have never tasted. But I've tasted so many times with Paul, and he explained me the red currant, and we search it. Every time we taste with Paul, we search in Google for different kind of flavors. Fruits, vegetables, spices.
Today was no exception.
No exception. Like 5 different. There's a lot of tastings. Like he says something about wine, and we don't understand because the translation is not so easy. So we have to Google it and see what it is. Well, it's something. Today he says something about a candy. The one that is the
butterscotch.
The butterscotch. Butterscotch. What the hell is a butterscotch for us? So we said, and in Wikipedia, I said that it has something to do with toffee.
Toffee.
Oh, okay, yes, it makes sense with this wine. Oh, yes, and it's and now I know that in a few 2 more tasting with Paul, and I will definitely know what the butterscotch.
And better next time I use the word toffee.
Toffee. Santi, I don't know, because you didn't tell me what wine are we drinking, and let us know if Paul worked with this with your improvement of this wine or not.
We are tasting a Cabernet Sauvignon from Atlántico Sur range. It's a Cabernet Sauvignon that we didn't think about working Cabernet when we started with Paul. We were focused on Tannat and also Chardonnay, but we started thinking about this idea of showing Uruguayan Cabernet Sauvignon. Mainly, it was a Nino, my brother's idea of what if we showed Cabernet outside Uruguay? Because we do a really good Cabernet Sauvignon. It is not the Californian style. It is not the Luján de Cuyo in Mendoza style, but it's it's an Atlantic Ocean style. And we are really proud of it. It's a fresher style that what use is not so bold, but it has its own identity.
Absolutely.
And we were talking with Paul about this.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, I think it reads a lot of coastal Cabernet, which, you could almost say Napa Valley is coastal, but it's maritime, but it's sort of semi-coastal. Here, I get more of the true Cabernet, which when you think about Cabernet, the regions where it's grown is mostly continental. I mean, Bordeaux is probably somewhat coastal, but not that much either, even though it's near big rivers. And Napa Valley, somewhat. But this is probably the first really true Cabernet. Maybe there's coastal Cabernet from California, but it has its own unique characteristic. It has great energy. It has a fullness and a juiciness on the palate. It's fresh and vibrant, and it has a bit of minerality as well. And then there's this saline, like, I don't know, you could say almost like a little oyster shell kind of quality. Maybe it's limestone, but there's sort of this little oyster shell kind of quality that comes through in the wine. Anyway, there's a lot of freshness, and I think you don't get any of the green notes. Typically, when you think of coastal Cabernet, you think, oh, maybe it's going to be green. It's going to have like bell pepper character or something. No, this has none of that. This is purely, it is fruit-driven, but it has more than that too. It has this sort of limestone, I don't know, you could seashell kind of quality to it. I find quite attractive.
And also we tasted today, and we said it has this garrigue flavor that is a French word for these herbs that grows in the beach in Uruguay, in the sand, and it has this approach like you feel like walking through the beach, you know.
That's what's beautiful about high quality noble grapes, right? I mean, at the end of the day, they reflect place.
Yes,
and that's I think this Cabernet is a beautiful example of that.
I'm surprised you didn't choose a Tannat, because most of the work with Paul at the beginning was like focusing on Tannat. And I was wondering, what do you do different in Tannat because of Paul came to the winery? And
well, in the beginning, we said, okay, Paul, how do you do your best wines, your best Cabernet Sauvignon, your best Malbecs? And it had a beginning of the fermentation in one style, which is a high temperature and big maceration at the beginning. And then it's a very soft, gentle maceration at the end.
Sort of like landing an airplane, you know, nice and glided in.
Yes. And we started doing that. At the end of the fermentation, the tannins were, although the grapes were amazing, the quality of the tannin of the grapes were amazing, the concentration was so high that we didn't enjoy the wines at the end. And every single time we tasted the barrels with Paul, even 2 years in barrels, and Paul said, no, this is secante, this is dry tannins. And one day, it was like in 2015, 2016, we tried this crazy idea of making the same thing at the beginning, but when we tasted the wine at the middle of the fermentation, I thought that the tannins were ready. So we press it. We take out the juice and we continue the fermentation like a white wine. That it is like kind of not so proud for a winemaker, because winemakers like to do long macerations. But we did this. And then we gave Paul to taste this wine, and he was amazed with the quality of the tannins. We did this with a medium quality Tannat. It was not the best Tannat because it was too risky for us. Yeah. But the next year, we did it with our best Tannats. Not all the Tannat, but in every single plot, one part we did it like this. And we compared with the traditional winemaking and with the new approach that we were looking for. And the best one was this new crazy style. And then we did it again and again, and now we do our best Tannats, we do it this way.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, Paul, Uruguay is well known because of the Tannat, and you once, I actually recorded you saying that Massimo Deicas 2020 vintage was probably one of the best Tannats you ever tasted. But what else do we have in Uruguay? What other grape varieties do you find here that are interesting, or that you say this will have a future in Uruguay?
Well, recently I've tasted some amazing whites, and in particular the Alvarinho is showing amazing, but we know Chardonnay does well here as well also. So those are two whites that I think have great promise. It's interesting that, because I'm working in Spain and Galicia, and Godello also, I tasted Godello for the first time in Uruguay today, and I was quite impressed with how good that was. So there could be a family of white varieties that kind of read like Chardonnay. And then if you look at reds, the Cabernet Franc is quite interesting. We've already talked about Cabernet Sauvignon, and there's a lot of interest in Pinot Noir. So I think, you have to be very thoughtful about site selection and how you plant it and then how you're going to make it. And to Santiago's point, I think that you have to alter the winemaking given the place and so on and so forth. So and depending on the variety. So those are all things that need to be considered. So there's actually a lot we don't know, and that's making for a very exciting next few years.
And about the next few years, what are your takes on how is the wine industry transforming itself, and how do you see it in the next 10 years?
Well, if you look at the current situation, the wine industry, and I think the alcoholic beverage industry in general, is in a bit of a contraction. And but the wine industry needed a correction. It became so, because many people if I take California in particular, in Napa Valley, the prices went up crazy because big money started flowing in with people that had very little experience with making wine, but like the idea, the lifestyle to say, hey, I'm a film star or I'm a tech star, but I think I'd be sexier if I had a winery.
Yes, yes.
So you have a lot of people. You have a lot of people that came in like that. So we see a jump in the number of wineries in the U.S., like from 7,000 wineries maybe 10 years ago to 11,000 wineries or 12,000 wineries. That's just too many. And too many vineyards planted, not the best, and so on. So we're going to see a correction. And that we're in the midst of that now. It's going to take time, maybe another year or two before that's done. It's a worldwide correction, actually. I think it's happening in Europe. I know it's happening in Europe. I think it's happening here in South America as well. And that'll be good for the consumer. Generally speaking, I think consumption still continues to drop. But that said, I think it's good for those who are quality-minded. I think we see quality wines. People are drinking. It's been said for a long time, people are drinking less, but they're drinking better. And I think that trend is going to continue.
And there's also like a trend, the world is searching for new places, like for new places.
Yes, but I think what people are looking for mostly, they're looking for experience, right? So it's kind of cool if there's a new place, but it has to be reasonable. I mean, some people, because of technology, we can grow grapes here, but I think people want something authentic, and I think they want something that's good for them, for their health, and so on. So wines that are made authentically in a natural way. So I think that's where this thing is going. And they want, they care about place. I guess that's just a human quality, right? But I think people say, yeah, when I taste that wine, I kind of want to know where it's from. To give you an example, when I started working in Napa back in the late 70s, we were, everything was varietal oriented. We had no sub-AVAs, American viticultural areas. It was just Napa Valley. Today, there's 16 sub-AVAs. Some of them are quite famous now, like Oakville and Rutherford, and new ones like Coombsville and so on. So this is the natural growth of a young region, that you go more to the place than to the variety. So today, we've actually changed the hierarchy in our labeling of Paul Hobbs wines, for example, from being the brand and then the variety and then the place to the brand and then the place and then the variety. So we've kicked it into third position. And I think that's going to happen. That's happening here too, because people, the top producers in Uruguay and Argentina are beginning to think, the places where it's finally, that's what gives a unique stamp on the particular quality. So when I think of Valle de Uco, okay, that's a big place. But if you're living in the United States, you hardly know where Mendoza is. But at least people know where Argentina is.
Yes.
Right? So it's an educational process, and this process takes time. But as they start to think about it, because of course all the Americans that like wine and they drink Burgundy, they know all about the different, and they love to get into that and study it and understand, wow, this Pinot Noir tastes like this because it comes from this kind of soil, these kind of climate conditions, this kind of farming. Well, that is, I think, going to be what excites people to come to Uruguay, to come to Argentina, to come to new places. But just to find a new place, like, oh, can I make wine in Bulgaria or Romania? Sure, you can do that.
Yes.
But and if you can do it well, I think people will be interested.
To add what Paul is saying, I think that talking about fine wines, there's going to be like two different ways. Wines, local wines that are associated to local experiences. So if you visit Uruguay, for example, it obviously would be 100%. Everybody that comes to Uruguay will taste Tanat.
Yeah.
If they are searching for wine, if they are winey guys that comes to they are wine educated or wine searchers for wines, and they travel to Uruguay, they will taste Tanat and they would enjoy it with a barbecue or with a good vegetable in an asado.
Sí.
But there will be other wines that are tasted and enjoyed in a table in New York in comparison with the best wines in the world. And those wines, I think that it would be difficult to think about exotic varieties in those tables. It would. I don't imagine a Criolla being tasted in those tables. I don't imagine a Torrontés, a Marcelin. I don't imagine a Tanat today in that table. So in that table in the New York, where people don't even know where Uruguay is, we can get someday a Albarino for sure, because Albarino might be compared with other Albarinos in the world, or we could get with a Pinot Noir or a Cabernet Sauvignon, or a Merlot, if Merlot gets also a sexy name again. But those varieties, like noble varieties, well-known varieties, I think that are the varieties that can get us in the table of the high-end wines.
I think so. You know, it's funny because you have pockets, and then you think about New York as being one thing in a way, right? But it's not. Of course, it's the Queens, and it's the Bronx, and it's Brooklyn, and it's Manhattan, and so on. And there's little niches, and some of those niches, nobody wants to drink the mainstream varieties.
Yes.
So they want the Marcelin, they want the Petit Mansang, and these varieties that, I didn't know about myself until 10 years ago or 20 years ago. So I think you've got a nice mix, and it's kind of hunting for where to take each kind of variety. But of course, we know that a variety like Cabernet Sauvignon is internationally known, and it can be a kingmaker for a region. But I think people today, particularly the younger people, they want to see authenticity of place. And so when they think about that, they're going to think, okay, yeah, have a good Cabernet. That's good. But what we want is indigenous. What's indigenous?
Yes.
So what the work I'm doing in Armenia, for example, if I was making Western European varieties, I don't think anybody would be interested today, no matter how good it was. They want to, so what's authentic to the place? And then when they want to come and learn about that.
And also there will be something new, that there's new varieties that's been developing that needs almost no adding of anything in the vineyard, that are very healthy varieties, very resistant in weathers like we do here in Uruguay, that it might be something quite impressive in a future that might be 10 years and more.
Yeah.
That we don't know what's going to happen, but there's been big changes in new developed varieties.
Yeah, so we can see how that plays out.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, the New World, when we think about the New World, South America began when? 150 years ago?
Yes.
More or less. And so that's relatively in recent time. And most of the varieties came from the Roman migration across Western Europe. And then finally, people brought these cuttings or cultivars to South America. But when you go to the ancient world, you have a lot of old varieties. Hard to know what their background is or what their ancestry or genealogy is. But those would be some fun ones to bring here as well.
Yes. Well, we are experimenting with Mansen Noir, which is like predecessor of Tanat.
Right.
And the result is amazing. Amazing. So we are starting to looking back
Yep.
to varieties that gave birth to the varieties that we have today. And it's true that it might be something there.
And last, I'm really sorry of doing the last question because I am really enjoying this opportunity with Paul.
I told Paul, our podcast could be half an hour or 10 hours
Yeah.
because there's so much to talk about.
But my last question is: what excites you about like the future, working here with Santiago, with Familia Deicas? What do you see in the future that makes you like excite you?
Well, in a sense, and I'll I'm thinking of borrowing an expression from Mr. Mondavi that he would say with quite frequency is we've just scratched the surface, meaning that we've just begun. And I think that's true. I mean, when you think about what's happened since I first came here in 1993, and for those 3 years, not much changed. And then I was gone for, another 7 or 8 years before your father came and knocked on my door. And when I came back to Uruguay at that moment, I said, wow, a lot has happened here in the 10-year span or whatever it was that I was gone. So, but it's still recent time. And there is much development. And of course, in today's world, things develop much faster with the technologies that we have and communication and so on and so forth.
But wine is slow.
Wine is slow because you can only make it. It takes time to plant, to find the vineyard, to study things, and to do it right. And then no matter how well you do it or how well you think you did, you'll always only get a part of it right. So it's a little bit like there's some guesswork, quite a lot of guesswork when you're developing something new. So there's a long amount of work and effort and time to continue the exploration. So that's what's exciting. There never is going to be a day of boredom.
Never.
Never.
Especially with Santiago and Fernanda. Always.
Never going to be a day.
Santi, your final
Paul,
words. Thank
Paul,
you.
For me, it's a pleasure, and I've stayed at Paul's house many times in California, in New York. He stays at home many times. My daughter gave drawings to Paul.
Yeah.
It's part of the family. We know what Paul likes to eat. I'm really happy that Paul is eating much more in the last trips. He's enjoying life better than. It doesn't show. And it's really fun, a pleasure for me, and it's an honor also to have you here. When we started planning the podcast, the first one that I put is Paul. I would love to have Paul sitting here with us and talking about his life and his experience in Uruguay and why he's doing these crazy things with us. And it's been a pleasure to have you here. It's been really honored. And I hope to have you in the 3rd season or 4th season of the podcast. You will always be invited to speak with us.
Thank you. Let's have the adventure continue.
Cheers.
Cheers. Salud.
To everyone listening
Salud.
to us for the first time in English, you may join us again in another episode, but in Spanish. Cheers.
Salud.
Salud.
Qué bueno estuvo.
Sí.
Bueno, Paul, ahora grabamos otro
En
10
español.
horas más.
En español.
10 horas más.